Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, August 21st, time for the PM edition of C2-A-Days from campus to Canton. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen. Wanted to dive into some quarterback news. And first of all, we've got a handful of officially named starters, nothing too surprising out of Illinois. Luke Altmaier was named the starting quarterback by head coach Brett Bielema today, the transfer from Ole Miss. Not a surprise there. He was a pretty heavy favorite to start soon after transferring to Illinois from Ole Miss. At Virginia, Tony Muskett was named the starter. At FIU, Casey Thompson was named the starter by head coach Tom Herman, and at UMass, Don Brown named Tyson Pomachon the starter for the Minutemen. We've mentioned those names briefly in passing for the most part as we've gone through fall camp. None is a major shocker to earn that top spot on the depth chart, but we are starting to see a little bit more of the official announcement coming through, particularly at the quarterback position. That's the big one, obviously. But a couple of other places are, still working on it. I mean, most everyone, I guess, is still working on it if there's not an incumbent starter. But a big battle of interest for the majority of folks who pay attention to college football is Ohio State. And Andy Backstrom of the On3 site that covers Ohio State noted some quotes from Ryan Day, who it sounded like earlier in fall camp had maybe hoped to have a starter nailed down. We know Kyle McCord and Devin Brown have been competing for this job. Devin Brown, of course, if you missed it, was not able to play in the spring game due to an injury late in the spring. A lot of folks at the time thought that might give McCord a bit of an edge to take advantage of those extra reps, that larger stage. And apparently it just hasn't quite worked out that way. Brown was able to get back, be involved in summer workouts. I believe this might have been the very first thing that we mentioned on C2-A-Days when we kicked off on August 1st. But the closer we get to the season, you wonder if Devin Brown might have a real shot to win this job. There have been some whispers out there that certainly could be the case. I personally have always had Kyle McCord as the projected starter in our FBS team profiles. For example, McCord is listed with the starters in our offensive depth chart projections for Ohio State. Part of that is he's more experienced. Started a game, has played in 12 in his career. Saw an average of nearly 10 snaps per game that he had an opportunity to play last season. And then, he is, according to the way that we calculate things, the higher rated player, mostly because of that experience. He's a third-year junior, and Devin Brown, a redshirt freshman. We wait for experience and production. McCord has added a couple of production points to his overall individual player rating, what we call VGR, video game rating, set up to be similar to Madden or the old NCAA game, for example. But Devin Brown is obviously a highly touted, highly rated recruit, and seems like has a legitimate shot at this job. So if we were to get news that Devin Brown was pulling ahead, potentially going to be the starter, it would change things just slightly in our team profiles and our power ratings. I might have buried the lead. Ohio State is currently number one in our overall power ratings. That if you haven't heard the CFB Winning Edge podcast or seen me specifically discuss it somewhere else, maybe that's a little bit of a surprise. It seems like 99% of every person or analytics outlet has Georgia number one, and understandably so. Ohio State is basically a co-number one with Georgia, and actually the margin is so slight that this quarterback competition, if Devin Brown, being the slightly lower rated player, ends up winning the job, would actually be a big enough gap to put Ohio State behind Georgia in our rating. So anyway, that's maybe more detail than everyone's looking for today. But according to Ryan Day, a couple of quotes from Backstrom. There's no one that's won the job. There's not one that's lost the job. Said that there's a chance both will play in week one at Indiana. Perhaps this is a situation, I mean, we've seen it a lot of places, but it reminds me a little bit of what Michigan did last year with J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara. Give one a chance to start 1 week, see how it works out. I'm not expecting Ryan Day to do, we're starting this guy week one, this guy week two. But there's certainly a chance that they have an opportunity to win the job out on the field. But also, according to Backstrom, both players graded out as champions during Saturday's scrimmage, according to Ryan Day. So it's not necessarily the case that nobody has just gone out there and won the job. It's not that both guys are struggling, it sounds like, especially if they're grading out well in the scrimmage. But seems like they're both potentially, according to the reports, if we're to believe what we're told, that both are playing well, elevating their level of play, and legitimately in the mix to be considered the starter. So looks more and more like maybe we'll see both of them week one at Indiana. But in the meantime, certainly we'll be trying to find as much as we can to figure out if Kyle McCord's going to be able to hold off the challenger, Devin Brown, or if Brown will eventually win out and get this job. One place where we also don't have an official announcement, but signs indicate that DJ Uiagalelei could soon potentially be announced as Oregon State's starting quarterback. Jake Hedberg of Beaver Blitz reported that at a recent media viewing period, it was the first time all fall camp where there was a major noticeable difference in reps between the first and the second team. DJU basically, it sounds like, took every snap with the number one offense on Monday morning. Ben Gulbranson only saw one series of work with the number one offense. So all signs pointing toward DJU being named the starter for Oregon State, not officially, but could be coming. Sounds like there's some separation now. We do have some official depth chart releases as teams prepare for their first game of the year. We saw late last week, Navy released their week 0 depth chart for the game against Notre Dame in Dublin. Notre Dame tweeted out the PR team their week 0 depth chart. We've been paying attention to a ton of sources this fall camp, so there really weren't major surprises. Notre Dame's got an army of team sites and beat reporters and a lot of folks who are working really hard to stay on top of things. So it wasn't a surprise for us to see the wide receiver group shaking out as it has. Jaden Thomas, Chris Tyree, and Tobias Merriweather were listed as the starters at the 3 wide receiver groups. Deion Colsey, Rico Flores Jr., and Jaden Greathouse were also listed as the second group, with Matt Salerno with an or between he and Rico Flores behind Merriweather on the depth chart. At running back, Audric Estime is the clear number 1 player for the Fighting Irish, and then it's a pretty well stocked and potentially tight race for that number 2 spot. Listed as they are on the depth chart, Jabrian Payne or Jadarian Price or Devin Ford or Jeremiah Love are all jockeying for carries behind Estime. Wyoming, who doesn't play until week 1, but still has released a depth chart as well. One eye-raising listing there. We've talked plenty about the running back injuries that Wyoming has dealt with so far this year. Harrison Whaley, the transfer from Northern Illinois, most would assume, if fully healthy, would be the starter. He is not currently listed on the depth chart. That was to be expected. Probably going to miss the first 2 or 3 games for the Cowboys this year. Unfortunately, also, Wyoming has lost another potential starter at the position to a season-ending injury, unfortunately. DeWine McNeely earlier in August suffered a torn ACL that's going to cost him the remainder of the season, the entire season, most likely. And then DQ James is, behind those two, the most experienced player at the position. He had been limited early in fall camp, had worked his way back, seemingly, it sounds like, close to 100%. Nevertheless, a name that surprised a lot of folks was actually listed ahead of James at number 1 on the running back depth chart for the Pokes. It was Jamari Farrell, a junior out of Mission Viejo, California, who doesn't seem like has made any appearances yet in his college career, based on just a very quick search I did. New face, new name, potentially at the top of that running back depth chart. So it'll be interesting to see if Farrell is going to be able to make it stick at the top of the depth chart, if James is going to get an opportunity. Sam Scott, converted linebacker, is 3rd on that depth chart. So it's an area that Wyoming is lacking some depth already, with a couple of players who were expected to be in some combination, probably number 1 and number 2 at the running back spot, are not going to be available in week 1. A small surprise potentially at wide receiver for Wyoming. Wyatt Weiland is starting in the slot ahead of Devin Bodie Jr., who we've read a couple of things about this fall as really being impressive in his first year, early first practices after transferring into Wyoming. Similarly, Ayer Asante is backing up Ryan Marquez at the Z wide receiver position. Asante and Bodie were getting a lot of really positive reviews early in fall camp. So potentially a little bit of a surprise that they are not listed as starters right now. But if I haven't said this before, if you haven't heard it before, I do think it is important to be somewhat skeptical on official depth charts. Some programs are great about putting exactly what they expect to be on the field on paper. Some are not very good. Some will post it once and never change it week to week. It's tough to know which team is which. And Wyoming's usually pretty good, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Bodie and Asante, even if they may not be the first players out on the field in week 1, starting at wide receiver, that they eventually, their talent potentially wins out. So we'll see, of course, how it shakes out as we get a little closer. But the potentially more important thing, though similarly, doesn't necessarily mean that DQ James isn't going to end up as the leading rusher in week 1 for Wyoming. But with Jamari Farrell getting the that top spot, at least as it sits right now on paper. Interesting to note, potentially. One running back who will not be playing this season is Iowa State's Jarrell Brock, who Randy Peterson of the Des Moines Register noted that Brock has voluntarily left the Iowa State football team. Peterson tweeted out. His source was an athletic department spokesperson. We've mentioned before, and as Peterson said as well, Brock is being investigated, has been investigated in the ongoing gambling probe. Washington State got some bad news about Lawrence Falatea, a potential contributor on the defensive line who tore an ACL and is going to miss the season, according to Coach Jake Dickert. That was tweeted out by CougFan.com, the 247 site. Some good news, on the other hand, from Florida. Dante Zanders, it sounds like, will be available for the opener against Utah, according to Jacob Rudner of 247 Sports. Zanders has been dealing with an injury for most of fall camp, has missed some time, and good news to hear that he is expected to be back in time to make his week one appearance, at least according to Rudner. Bucky's fifth quarter, the SB Nation site following Wisconsin, Rohan Chakravarti mentioned and shared some quotes from head coach Luke Fickell for the Badgers, talking about a couple of players who will miss time, will miss at least the first game of the season, maybe 2 or 3. We mentioned this morning very briefly a report from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel who mentioned that potential, likely, maybe even starting center Jake Renfro is going to be out. And also tight end Riley Nowakowski is going to miss potentially, looks like 4 to 6 weeks, which is disappointing news, of course. Offensive coordinator Phil Longo, according to the piece, said that Nowakowski had been one of the most consistent players, certainly was the most consistent player at the tight end position in spring practice. Had worked his way up into the mix to potentially start at tight end for Wisconsin. And without Nowakowski, we mentioned a couple of players at the position who left Wisconsin earlier this fall with other medical issues or stepped away from the team. So that's a position that's getting more and more thin as Longo and Fickell look to change up that Wisconsin offense, moving away from the run first, run second type offense that we got used to under Paul Chryst and the coaching staffs prior to Fickell and Longo's arrival. So interesting to see certainly how that tight end position shakes out. Hayden Rucci is a returning starter there, but haven't honestly heard a ton out of him. It had been mostly positive reports about Nowakowski potentially edging him out at that position. Boise State, Rachel Roberts of the Idaho Statesman just gave a quick recap of the scrimmage over the weekend. Wanted to note, because we had mentioned I think our last Boise State report a week or more ago mentioned how Ashton Jeanty had been seeing some time with the wide receiver group. And we've mentioned several other instances across the country where that had been the case. Some talented running backs getting a little work. We've also talked about some tight ends and other folks getting a few snaps in the backfield. That time of year, I suppose, see what folks can do, try to create some new packages and things like that. But according to Roberts, did just want to mention that Helani and Jeanty were both playing running back, and though were used sparingly in the scrimmage, getting 6 and 3 carries respectively, they were both operating at running back. So Jeanty's move, not that we expected it to be a full position switch, but does not seem to be the case, is primarily working at running back as expected. At Wake Forest, Connor O'Neill of Deacons Illustrated had an interesting piece about quarterback Mitch Griffiths, who had been sidelined with a stomach bug for a few days. Talked about how he basically just hung out at home and watched Elon games on YouTube. Wake Forest opens the season with Elon, but that Griffiths able to get back to practice, and after shaking off a little rust, was inaccurate with his first few throws. improved and had a big performance with a late game situation, 15-yard touchdown pass to Jamal Banks in a one-on-one situation that was the game winner in this hypothetical scenario. But a quote that caught my eye from Griffiths talking about Jamal Banks, who especially with Donovan Green being out for an extended period of time, is the clear number one at Wake Forest and one of the better wide receivers in the ACC, a big target. And according to Griffiths in the report from O'Neill, said, quote, got the look that brought me to him, to Banks, and obviously that's just his thing, jump balls. 50-50 balls are like 90-10 with him. So just give him a shot, and he made a great catch. So we've seen the jump ball at Wake Forest. We've seen A.T. Perry. He, of course, has moved on. Banks seems like is ready to step right in and be that red zone target, big target. Certainly impresses his quarterback with his ability to go up and get it. And then later in the piece, because we have been trying to figure out what's the pecking order going to be behind Banks, especially with Green sidelined, and there was a note about Walker Merrill, and Connor O'Neill mentioned that it's not a secret who Michael Kern, who's Griffith's backup, his favorite target with the second team offense, talked about that Kern connected with Merrill on gains of 11, 15, 14 yards, then threw a 26-yard touchdown pass, and just a quick explanation or a little more context, said that Merrill seems to be behind Grimes. So we are talking about Wesley Grimes. Seems to be behind Grimes for the number 2 wide receiver spot, but is probably past Horatio Fields for number 3 in the pecking order. So it sounds like maybe Banks and Taylor Morin, returning starter, are locked in. I've in the FBS team profiles, CFB Winning Edge team profiles, have Keyshawn Williams as that third starting wide receiver. Grimes is in the mix. Sounds like, according to O'Neill, he's number 2 at his particular position. But Merrill, especially impressing and having a connection with Kern, probably helps with that. Seems to be in line for some playing time for sure. And final note from Auburn, Nathan King of Auburn Undercover has a piece worked on with a few other Auburn Undercover writers, and in the section labeled Jason's Notes, first time we've mentioned Shane Hooks. I believe he started his career at Ohio, was most recently at Jackson State, the FCS level, of course, playing for Deion Sanders there. But pretty interesting spot, or pretty wording, I should say. Says Shane Hooks may be Auburn's best receiver, and that didn't just start Saturday when there was the scrimmage, of course, and Shane Hooks had 2 touchdown catches in that scrimmage. Apparently, there's a comfort level with Peyton Thorne, the recently named starting quarterback at Auburn, and the Jackson State transfer. Thorne has targeted Hooks in all sorts of passing settings and practices. And then one final note, this again was from Jason Caldwell, I believe, and said on Saturday that he was told Damari Alston, quote, looked like the best running back on the team. Jarquez Hunter, the presumed starter, also had some good runs, and it'd be surprising if Hunter doesn't start, according to the piece. But Alston continues to be elusive and explosive during fall camp. Also caught a pass for a touchdown recently as well. So that will do it for us this evening. I'm sure we'll have more quarterback announcements coming soon. Maybe a surprise or two. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more about the ongoing Kyle McCord and Devin Brown competition. I'm not necessarily holding my breath. I do expect we'll see both of them early this season, but never know. So that will wrap it up for the PM edition of August 21st, Monday evening. We will be back in the morning. Already have a few notes stashed away that we'll talk about, some group of five follow-ups to scrimmage reports and other news and notes as well. So check back in with us tomorrow morning, Tuesday. Again, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen for campus2canton.com, and this has been the PM edition of C2-A-Days.